listening to the Grand Army of the Republic broadcast, the voice of the Outer Rim.
Hello, Shadiversity. It's nice to see you again.
Oh, it is an absolute pleasure to be here, Sir Shiney, and how are you?
I'm doing pretty good. Congratulations on reaching 1 million subs. It's quite an achievement.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's interesting how that's kind of gone. I didn't have a viral video where things exploded, and it seems to be when a lot of people break into YouTube think that you have to have this big moment where you get a lot of attention, and it could be through a controversy or it could be one insanely successful video or something like that, and that's gonna push you over the line. That never happened for me. I mean, I had some videos that did particularly well, but never the insane virality that you can see it sometimes going. It's always been a very steady but consistent growth, and that's kind of satisfying. It feels like you just keep making good content and you get there eventually. So yeah, it's been a very satisfying and fulfilling thing.
From what I also understand, recently you bought some land in Australia. I was curious if you could elaborate more on what you're doing with that.
Yes, well, at the moment, I'm shooting arrows on it. Seems like a bit of a way, but no, I got. Of course, I have larger plans with it for the future. Ultimately, I mean, I want to live on the land. It's this beautiful, beautiful thing, and my further plans in the future is to perhaps even build some castles on it. It's got these beautiful rolling hills. It's 139 acres, which is kind of, I've always wanted a big bit of land, right? That's where I could just have this beautiful big home, and then you can do whatever the heck you want. Just literally yesterday, I went onto the property and I got out my big 100-pound bow, and I was just shooting arrows as far as I possibly could, and it was awesome. And so when I do eventually live on it, we'll be able to have animals, plant an orchard. Man, there's even like a small lake on it. It's just got heaps of just space, which is what I've always wanted, but I never thought I'd be able to find the property that I wanted in the price range I could afford or in a convenient location, because basically the closer to civilization you look for a nice bit of land, the more expensive it becomes. And then this property that came up that I ended up purchasing, it was a miracle. Everything fell in place. It was absolutely amazing. And one of the most amazing things about it, it's like 2 minutes down the road from where I'm currently living. It's technically in the township. When I tell people I got this land, they ask me where it is. I tell them the town, and they're like, "Where'd you get? There's no place that big in the township." And I'm like, "It's hidden, but it's there." And they can't believe it, and neither could I. So like I said, it's been a dream come true.
Do you think this is an unrealistic dream to build castles on this land, or do you think it's very much possible for you to do someday in the future?
Of course it's possible. Yeah, it's funny. I often, have to sit back and it causes me to reflect, because when I say these things, right, like the things that I plan to do in the past, especially, people always had reacted like, "Oh, okay," in the sense that that's not going to happen. And I've never really had that mindset. I've always thought I'll be able to do it someday. Just keep working towards it, just wait for the opportunities. I'll do it. And it reminds me of this thing that happened years ago, which reflects this exact same kind of exchanges I've had with people, where I was at a regular job. I was working in a construction firm as a client contract manager, and had to go out to inspect a site with 2 other people from the office, and we're just talking about houses that we would want to build in the future. And they asked me, and my answer is like, "Well, I'd like to build a castle. I need a big lot of land, everything." And then at the end, I just said, "But I have to wait until I'm rich and famous to be able to do that." And the weird thing, right, when I said that, I said it like without even thinking about what that really meant. I'll just do it when I'm rich and famous. That's what I was working towards. And, if I keep working, that's what I'm going to get there. That, I thought it was just a standard comment. I look back, and my 2 colleagues were looking at me and like, "What?" And they're like, "So how are you going to do that? Tell us, how do you become rich and famous?" I'm like, oh, I guess, yeah, to most people, that's a very unrealistic, unfathomable kind of a proposition. And it kind of pulled me up to realize, man, most people don't really have those goals, do they? I guess from my mindset, like, I think about the things that I want to do, and then I start working towards it. Small steps, but you set out a plan on how you think you will be able to achieve that. And you learn about, how to do things effectively and efficiently, and you figure out what your talents and abilities are, what you can do to achieve what you want. And then you set out a plan and you start working towards it, even if it's small steps. And at that time, I was really focusing on my writing. And so my small steps was working on my book, just every single day, just writing a little bit on my book. But those are the steps I was taking. Even though small steps, over the course of time, they build up, and eventually you can build up to being able to pull it off and being successful. And it's so interesting that thinking back all then to all the way now, where I've actually taken a very large step towards that goal, where I have this beautiful, massive piece of land that, that I want to build a castle on. And so in this position, when, if people hear, my intentions of building castle, and they hear about it, think about, with skepticism, like that's not going to happen. Well, it's like, a lot of people were very skeptical when I said I wanted to be a successful author and write my own book and do it successfully, not just publish a book, but do it successfully. And by working hard, I was able to pull that off as well. And so, I'm sure, luck has certainly also played a role in it along the way, and I need to give credit and acknowledge that. But what I really find is, I think luck is probably a way of describing certain opportunities that come your way. And these opportunities can be very lucky. You're very lucky that you got certain opportunities. But what I find when I kind of look at this in a broad sense, I actually feel that most people, if not all people, actually have many opportunities that cross their path, that if they took advantage of them, they could end up becoming massively successful. And some of these opportunities might not seem so obvious, but they're there. For instance, the internet. Okay, if you want to learn something, you don't need to go to university now. You look it up and you learn it. And so I have had several university level, levels of education in creative writing that I have participated in, that I've never needed to attend university or pay a cent to receive, because they're all available online. All the lectures are online. So I've participated in several years worth of university lectures in creative writing to hone the craft, to learn how to do it. And I didn't need a cent. And this is a good example of the opportunities that are available to so many people. And so, yes, I'm so darn lucky. If this wasn't possible, if I didn't have access to learn these things, I never would have been able to write a successful book. So in that sense, that is very, very lucky. But on the other side of the coin, it's also a matter of recognizing these opportunities and taking advantage of them. And once you take advantage of them, yeah, you honestly can achieve things that many people would assume are utterly unrealistic. Build a castle, are you sure? Well, just wait and see. Watch me.
It's very interesting you bring this mindset up, because I don't think it's a mindset a lot of people tend to have. And it's something which I've kind of experienced myself in my own life. So it's always good to see when people kind of do have this mentality towards how they live their life and do recognize the opportunities that often pass a lot of people by.
Yeah, and it sometimes makes me feel, because my life has become more blessed than I can express, and I feel so lucky and so blessed, and it puts me in a situation where I would love everyone to be able to have such financial freedom, have success in achieving so many of the dreams that they work towards. And it makes me wonder, okay, so then is there a difference? And I have to look at myself in the past, and it's like, well, I was unemployed, I had 3 children, I was married, and so there was technically 4 people that I needed to try and provide for. I have to say, there was still a lot of difficulties in my own way that were, preventing me. So, I honestly feel a lot of things can be achieved, when you just decide and you start to work towards it. And it becomes like almost a momentum when a rock, starts rolling down a hill and can cause an avalanche. Because once you take advantage of one opportunity, more opportunities then come, and more and more and more. And when you get a little bit of success, you can actually capitalize that and build upon it to get more success. And so where I'm at now, I even have more opportunities than I ever had before, because I have resources that I can invest and start building towards even greater things. Yeah, it's a very fascinating thing when I think about it. I get very reflective and introspective almost and stuff. And so sorry, I'm getting all reflective, but yeah, I agree completely with what you're saying.
So, moving on a little bit, this isn't the first castle you've built. I'm curious about what your neighbors think about you always building these castles and running around with swords all the time.
Well, I'm lucky that my current house is on a very long block. And so where I go to do all my filming and stuff, I am out of sight. You're right. There is a castle-like structure I have already constructed, which is the backdrop I use in my videos. And it's funny, the initial design was actually a good 1 to 2 meters higher. And as I was getting built, they built the frame. And I'm like, oh, that was probably going to be a little too conspicuous. Let's drop that down a bit, fellas. And so we dropped it. And I was lucky I did actually, because if it was any higher than what it is, I probably wouldn't be able to fit it in the frame of the shot in my videos. And so, yeah, I was lucky that I did. And by doing so, most of the trees around it are taller than the castle backdrop. And so it actually doesn't cause too much attention. No one can see it basically from the road or anything. And so when I have actually people come into the backyard to either drop off some garden supplies or work on, a renovation or something like that, they come in and they like, whoa, what's that? Because you can't see it anywhere else. And it's always fun to see their reactions when they do notice that there's a castle there, basically. But in my previous house, the neighbors, I have no idea what they thought. I didn't interact too much with them, but I'm sure they noticed and heard me doing stuff. I just have to kind of be like, not care, ignore them. Like, if they think I'm a madman, I accept it happily.
What, you think you're not a madman?
Well, I guess it depends on what your perspective is on sane, isn't it? It depends on a point of reference. If everyone loved castles, then those who didn't are the ones who are mad. So, touche.
I'm curious if you've ever been noticed in public, and what's kind of your reaction been to being noticed in public?
Yeah, it's a very, very odd experience, very flattering experience. I get a little conflicted because I get really annoyed with douchebag celebrities. Not all of them are. There are actually some really solid, down-to-earth celebrities, but there's a decent amount who are just absolutely... They get a bit disconnected from reality, and I think, honestly, it comes from this strange phenomenon that happens when you get very popular, where there's a lot of people showering compliments and praise upon you, on these people. And when so many people are telling, an individual that they're really wonderful, exceptional, that they're loved and everything, it's actually easy to understand how these people can then start to feel that they might be a little bit better than other people because other people don't get such praise and compliments. Everyone's saying they're wonderful, so maybe they really are wonderful. And then they start to get entitled because when someone then treats them in a way that they feel is beneath their position and status, they can get really better. How dare, do you know who I am? They kind of get that kind of thing. And I get really, when I see that, I was like, I really don't want that to ever happen to me. And I don't want to be as arrogant to assume it could never happen to me because it's a very subtle thing. It will always happen incrementally if it does happen, step by step, to the point where you become a douche without even realizing. And so I tried my very best to be very aware of that. And so when I get, so many praise and compliments, my honest reaction is to try and ignore it. It's like, yeah, and also to just acknowledge the reality as well, because if someone says I'm smart, I was like, well, I know a lot of people are a lot smarter than me, and I know of all the stupid things I've said. So thank you for the compliment. It is very flattering. And then in my head, I'm thinking, but you're wrong, basically. And so when people come up and say hi, it's really flattering because then I also have to reverse the thing, because I know there are people who I really admire, and if I ever had the chance to just meet them in person, I would think that would be really cool. I would really enjoy that, and because it's just awesome, like to meet someone in person. You admire them, you've always seen them through a computer screen or something like that. Now it's there. That's hello. And it's a buzz. You really, really enjoy that. So I do not want to rob anyone of the remarkable reality that they might get the same, reaction in meeting me, which is, I think, amazing that they would. And so when that happens, I'd be as gracious as I can. And I really do appreciate, because to think that they can get that buzz just from meeting me, because all I look back 5-6 years, right? And it's an interesting thing when I try and compare me to the past and there's no difference. I was the same person then as I am now, and so I'm an average person. I like, so the attention can sometimes strike me as a little strange. It's like, okay, because people didn't think I was worth attention back then, but I was the same person, I guess. But now, I don't know, you work and you gain attention through entertaining and sharing things and whatnot, and then more people learn who you are, and then they do want to say hi to you, and yes, it has happened, and it happens more regularly as my content, I guess, gets more seen. I mean, I was at Bunnings Warehouse, which is a home timber hardware store, basically, and stuff. And I had a mask on even, because of COVID. And one of the workers actually just go, so how's the castles going? And I'm like, oh, you recognize me, eh? And yeah, it was a flattering experience. And we just chatted briefly about what I was working on, because I was actually buying things for one of my future projects of a video and stuff. And it was great. He was, we got to just chat a little bit. He mentioned about, the land I bought, and he actually on the video, he was like, is that where this is? Because I think I reckon I was like, you got it, because it was a local, so he knew where it was. And so, yeah, but the YouTube fame is actually kind of cool, because it's like B grade, no, not even C grade fame, D, maybe E, like it's where in certain spheres you are recognizable and you have a measure of fame, but in the larger picture, most people have no idea who the hell you are. And I think that's brilliant, because in most situations, you're just a regular person. And I think, honestly, people need to be treated like regular people, because it's more healthy for them. And when they're not, it can be very difficult to maintain a grounded mindset, which is what you should be doing. Because I'm not saying you can't be a good, decent person when you're famous. Of course you can. It's just more difficult. And I prefer having an easier way in keeping myself grounded and not becoming a douche, basically. But yeah, so there are interesting experiences to share on that question.
I'm pretty sure you've already talked about this on your channel, but what gained your first interest in swords in the medieval period?
Oh yeah, that's a like, it's always been there. And if I reflect back, it's like, I can't think of a time when I didn't love swords. Like, I mean, I was into He-Man, and He-Man was like particularly, my things, magic sword by the power of Grayskull and everything. So, man, He-Man, and then Star Wars lightsabers, and then one of the my earliest memories with like a particularly uniquely medieval, based film was Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves with Kevin Costner, which in terms of accuracy is atrocious, but wow, I loved that as a kid, and the swashbuckling and the sword fights and all that. And I mean, what other films? Oh, The Princess Bride, with that, it's got a phenomenal, sword fight in it as well. And I like, it's always been like, if it was the action, the adventure, and everything. But wherever the first time I saw a sword in my life, and I don't know when that was, I can try and think of early memories, but I was already fully sucked into the awesomeness of swords and also medieval period. But whenever that happened, and the first time that is, I was into it. I was like, I loved it, and ever since, and it just grew and got when I say got worse, well, I got worse in a good way, in the sense that my interest deepened and my passion for it. And so from Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, to knights and castles and all that stuff. And a large portion really exploded when I got into Dungeons and Dragons as well. That was a wonderful bridge for me diving into the medieval world. It's interesting because Dungeons and Dragons is very much medieval fantasy, but the thing I was there for was the medieval side and less the fantasy side. Even though I loved the fantasy side, I was all about bring on the swords and knights and stuff. And then as my interest grew, I wanted to learn more about it. And so I remember drawing out all the weapons from the Dungeons and Dragons weapon lists, and then listing and their names, and then learning of what the other weapons that weren't in the list, and then realizing that some of the names are actually wrong and getting confused. Like, this person is calling you this, and what's the truth? And then wanting to find out what the facts were. And yeah, it all just grew and compounded one after another to the point where I was already a lost cause, but then I'm just drowning and immersing myself into this stuff more and more and more. Basically,
I do find it interesting the way you seem to talk about history on your channel. You talk about it more like it's real and not just numbers and statistics, which is the way a lot of people seem to look at history. I was wondering if you could elaborate more of the way you seem to look at history.
Well, thank you. I do appreciate that you feel that way. And I'm not the only one who does it, but I certainly know that I found the very idea and subject of history in school boring beyond belief. And yeah, I agree, there are some very awful ways history is presented. And I think that what the key difference is, for me, I wonder if it's actually connected to the fact that I love role-playing games and stuff, where I want to put myself in that world. And I'm like, what do we love about role-playing games? Dungeons and Dragons. And it's interesting. I'm not the only one who feels that way, but I don't begrudge anyone who does not agree with me and doesn't like playing role-playing games the same way. But I cannot get into miniatures with a tabletop pen and paper RPG. Wargaming, completely different. Miniatures, wargaming, awesome, on board. And so if I'm playing Hero Quest, that's not a proper role-playing game to me. That's actually more of a board game or something. But yeah, or a war game, something miniatures, yes. But when it comes to miniatures and role-playing, I cannot do it because it's like you're trying to picture the world in front of you and not picture yourself in the world. You're looking at your character instead of pretending you are the character. And so miniatures have always broken me out of the more immersive, imaginative side of role-playing game, which is, to me, imagining yourself as the character. And like, when you really get into, the role-playing game and stuff, and you're in a fight and you want to describe the way you're attacking, like, I'm the type of player that I have to get up out of my seat and actually, demonstrate the attack, play it out. I'm going to do this and stuff like that because I'm in the world. And to me, that is the most fun, enjoyable thing, to imagine yourself being in this other world. But you don't have to, only reserve that to fantasy. Imagining yourself in these other worlds can be just as enjoyable, even if they're historical ones. I think they can even be, in some cases, even more enjoyable because they were real. Absolutely. It's actually a more immersive thing to try and imagine yourself in that time. And that's what I kind of do. And when I do that, like, it's interesting when I love the medieval period. Out of any historical period, the medieval period is my favorite one. I wouldn't want to live in that time. Okay, I understand and very much appreciate the luxuries of the modern day, and so give me the choice. I'll definitely be picking the modern day. But if I had the opportunity to visit the medieval period and experience what life was like, and be in this different world, how amazing would that be? That would be the most incredible thing. And that's kind of what I like to try and do when I'm looking at history, is to imagine what it was actually like, what it would be like, what would a society have to be like where swords were used and worn as a main item for self-defense, and what is the sociological structures that were so specific that encouraged the building of these incredible fortresses that were also some person's home. Because that's an amazing thing. Look, because these structures are amazing, yet people didn't build them for no reason. There were reasons that actually caused them to need to be built. And that's an amazing thing. What are those things that caused such different practices to be carried out? And it makes me want to learn about them. And when you learn about them, and then to try and understand the very reasons why, and to basically ask yourself, if you lived in this world, okay, if you lived in this time, okay, what are the situations that would cause you to need to do the same things, to need to wear a sword, to need to build a castle? Because if you lived in that time, you would very much be a product of that time and be under the same practice. And this is why I really get annoyed with people judging the past. And I have like two sides, because there's almost like a side where people are too critical of the past and then also too apologetic of the past. And honestly, it can get a little political because you can see the times when they're being too critical is because they want to vilify certain things of the past. And the times they're being too almost forgiving is the times when they don't want to criticize certain elements of the past because it reflects on cultures and practices of the modern day. And both sides are a disingenuous picture of looking at the past in my mind, whereas like, no, you need to look at the past as an objective way possible to learn from it. And to understand that, okay, there were certain things that were done that were absolutely wrong and they should be condemned as wrong. But to condemn the individuals that were products of that time, that grew up in societies and cultures that had these, practices, well, that's a whole different kettle of fish as well. Because if you grew up in that time, guess what you'd be doing, okay? It was very exceptional individuals that bucked the trend and then were the catalysts for change, which changed the course of society and history. And they're amazing, subjects to study as well, because they are so exceptional on top of that. And so, sorry, I got a little bit on a tangent towards the end there, but round off to the question you're asking. Yeah, I think perhaps the difference is trying to imagine myself in that world. And when you do that, it becomes immersive and enjoyable and engaging and fascinating and just really, really fun. And this is the thing, it is legitimately fun. It's a legitimately immersing and amazing. And that's what I want to share with people. And so when I'm saying that this is really interesting, I'm saying it because not only do I think it is, but because it really actually is interesting, and I'm showing you why. And then when I'm happy to see that many people watch my videos actually are able to see how amazing, interesting certain things that might seem really boring on the face of it, but actually aren't. Like my very last video I uploaded was why mortar was used. Mortar, so the gooey stuff in between the stones on castles. Why that was used in castles. The whole video just dedicated on medieval mortar. And it sounds like such a dry topic. It's actually really interesting. So there you go.
Dry topic, huh?
Yes, because it must dry to work effectively.
So why did you start your YouTube channel?
So there are two answers to this, because there were two things very much on my mind and two very specific intentions behind me starting my YouTube channel. The first one was I wanted to share really interesting facts and the truth about the things I loved, like the medieval period. Like, I'm sorry, Dungeons & Dragons, you're getting all the swords wrong and everything like that. And just to share what the reality was about really interesting things, and particularly things I like being medieval period. And yeah, just to clear up misconceptions that were spread by movies and stuff. And so I had a lot to say, and YouTube was an awesome vehicle that I saw a way in which I could share it. But the other thing, which is very much part of this, was that my goal was to be a successful author. And I knew whatever audience I managed to grow on YouTube would be a tremendous help and asset to me in my plans to become a writer, which I am very happy to report worked out better than I could have imagined. Like, really, I was thinking, oh yeah, a couple of thousand, subscribers, like even that would be awesome. Okay. And it was a lot better than that. And I was not expecting YouTube to take off before, like, I wasn't even thinking it would take off. I was just, even if I was getting a couple of thousand views per video, that would be awesome. And I was banking everything on my pursuit in writing. And I actually became far more successful through YouTube, and I was able to make that my career before I even was able to publish my first book. So it evolved differently than I expected. Certainly not complaining, because that actually enabled the publication of my book to be even more successful, because I had such an established audience by that time. But no, that was very much the intent, because it's an interesting thing that when you look at the publishing world, because back in the day, there were some very almost impassable gatekeepers. If you couldn't get traditionally published, good luck. You're not going to get your book out there, basically. And the publishers had all the power, essentially. And so what could you do? But the world is so different now, where it's far more meritocratic than it ever has been. If you actually have the ability, if you can write something that's decent, okay, there are ways in which you can get it out there. But one of the big difficulties for any writer that wants to go down the self-publishing route is marketing. How are you going to get people to know about your book? And there are a lot of strategies that you can try and employ, and there are a lot of other good people sharing what those strategies are, whether on websites or even YouTube videos about marketing plans, publication, pacing your publication to try and capitalize. Because when you publish something on Amazon, it gets higher priority. And so if you write several books in a row and then doing like a publishing blitz, it might be able to, grow a lot of traction, everything like that. Trying to get reviews and other things, review copies out to, influence and other things. So there's all these methods and strategies. And they never really vibed well with me, because I kind of would want more control over the level of exposure I hopefully get for my book. And so my plan was, YouTube. If I could get a direct audience that I can then share my writing with, that's far more valuable. And I tell you, when I say it's far more valuable, that's an understatement, because I mean, it's thanks to my YouTube channel and building up an audience beforehand, I have actually been able to, give a level of exposure to my book that is literally valued probably in the range of $100,000, if not more. And that's not an understatement, because I actually know the exact rates, what it costs to get the amount of exposure to certain things, because I have brands coming to me, sponsorships, saying, if you share our product with your audience, whether it's Audible or Campfire or any number of sponsorships I've had, they'll pay you a certain amount based on a certain amount of views. So I know the amount, and then I can actually look at all the times I've been able to share my book, whether it was I sponsored my own video at the beginning of one, or dedicated a whole video to something that's very interrelated to my book, like nature of magical weapons, stuff like that, and use my book as a point of reference where I'm basically able to promote and share it as part of the video. That actually, at the end of the day, ends up being valued. If I had to pay another, say, YouTube channel or someone to get an equivalent level of exposure, I probably would have had to fork out $100,000, if not more, to get the similar amount. And I was able to give that to myself for free, which is unbelievably amazing. It's blows my mind. And so my marketing plan ended up working out phenomenally well for my book, and because of that, I've been able to, my debut novel has been phenomenally successful. If you combine the sales from all platforms, it's past about 30,000 copies now, and that's just combining print, ebook, and audiobook all together. And when you share those, numbers, it's funny actually. I approached a very, very prominent literary agent in the publishing world, and when I say prominent, is like the big, and I can share who it is, because it doesn't look like I'm actually going to be moving ahead with it. But it was Joshua Bilms. He's the literary agent for Brandon Sanderson. And Brandon Sanderson is basically one of the most popular fantasy authors in the world. And it was interesting because after approaching him, and because I wanted to see about foreign translations, and getting my book published in foreign markets, because that one is still, I could do it, but it's way too much work to even try and do myself at the moment. So I'd rather have someone else do it. So that's where there is some decent value in getting traditionally published in that way, in that kind of road. And he actually wanted to represent my book being published in all platforms. And he didn't feel it was really worth his while to just do it in a smaller segment. And that's what I find so intriguing about that, is that here is one of the best literary agents in the world, and he actually wanted to, represent my book and oversee its publication fully, like a full traditional publication thing, and that's what he would have rathered in the small things. But I don't need that. I actually can achieve all that on my own, and get my book, accessible across the entire world. Get the best, narrators to produce to help me. So hire the best narrators so I can produce the audiobook adaptation and get the audiobook on Audible, okay, and everything. I get all that on my own, and that just is absolutely mind-bogglingly amazing. And so there's a larger and more complex discussion about traditional publishing and versus self-publishing. And so I'm like, self-publishing is much better for me, but it's not going to be better for everyone. There are some good pros and cons that I think people should weigh up. But basically, you can do everything yourself. Foreign translations are the difficult one, and there isn't much else that traditional publishing can grant you that you can't do yourself. But the big difference is the workload. They can save you a lot of work, and they can help you produce the best version of your book possible because they have access to resources as well. You can still do it as well, but you're going to need to invest a lot more time and money. So if you're going to self-publish, it does require you investing some capital if you're going to do it properly, for cover art, if you're going to produce the audiobook and other things. So there are complex pros and cons with all that. It's absolutely amazing what you can achieve nowadays on your own with the resources that are available with you. And I get off on tangents. You might have to get used to that, Sir Shiny. But because the original question was, why did I start my YouTube channel? But that's basically it. It was a marketing plan to help launch my writing career, and it's worked out very, very good.
So your advice to anyone who wants to self-publish is basically to get famous.
Well, it helps if you can do it. It works really well, but even if you can't, it also depends on what you say by famous. I don't consider myself like I'm not a worldwide celebrity by any measure. But I have a measure of fame. I will acknowledge that, absolutely, especially amongst certain circles. But even if you have an audience of just a few thousand, that's a massive, massive advantage and benefit. Okay. And so whatever level of audience you can build, if you're wanting to self-publish, is going to be a tremendous asset and benefit to you. Because even if you've written the best book in the world, if you can't let other people know about it, it's going to be difficult to sell. There will be a time, and I don't know what point this happens, where it starts to promote itself through word of mouth, through people having read it and then sharing it with others. And once you have a book that has established enough kind of footing with a good number of reviews on the listings, whether it's on Amazon or Audible and everything, that can be enough to get the ball rolling, and then you can keep trying to keep pushing it, and it can still maintain itself. And that's even where I'm at the moment. I like the YouTube channel and everything has given me such a massive advantage, and that has built up a lot of momentum and established a very good foundation for the book, where now it has very positive ratings and a lot of reviews that are all really good and stuff. And so that momentum is working really well. But even if you start smaller, you can, and like I said, I don't know where that point is where it starts to be able to move forward on its own. But there is a point, and I think that point is even lesser than where I started, where word of mouth can get something to grow. And seriously, if you've written, or made the best book in the world, people are going to talk about it to others and get others to read it on as well. And so it might start slower, but even that can build to something very successful and popular.
I know I've already asked you this before, about a year ago, but for anyone who doesn't know, what's the story behind how you came up with your name?
The channel name?
Yeah, Shadiversity.
Well, it actually wasn't Shadiversity to begin with. The name of the channel for the first 10,000 subscribers was I Am Shad, which in retrospect was an awful name. It's just like I thought I was going to do that way. I should have just named it Shad Brooks, like the channel after my name. But no, I named it I Am Shad. And when people were referencing my channel when it had that name, it was always really awkward. I wanted to recommend a channel I'm not Shad, but the channel name is so it's really bad. And so I was like, I need to fix it. And so Shadiversity is a combination of Shad's University. That's the original kind of genesis of it. And not to claim any level of credibility, the same as university, though with what certain universities are trying to teach these days, it's like, oh goodness, sometimes there are some weird studies that people could pursue in university courses, but it's not to undermine the entire concept of the institution. Of course they hold value still, but a lot of it you can get for free online as well. So that's my kind of thoughts on that. But anyway, no, yeah, it's just like, it's not a real university, but I like to talk about things in a very in-depth way, perhaps even educate people to a certain measure. So there you go, Shad's University. And it's funny actually, because some people also think it's a play with Shadiversity, and I've kind of taken that on in the sense that I have very diverse interests, and I cover a diverse range of topics where it's not just medieval things. I talk about fantasy a lot, but also science fiction and writing and stuff. And so, so the channel name also can reference the diverse, nerdy interests of Shad as well.
A lot of your videos are talking about like lightsabers and other fantasy weapons. Do you think it was just natural to combine your knowledge and expertise to combine it together to talk about fiction and fantasy you enjoy?
Well, yes. And that question is more pertinent than you might realize, because a lot of the knowledge I have accrued on the medieval period, I have specifically the really detailed stuff, came out of the study and research I was doing for my writing, which was based in a medieval fantasy world, but I wanted this fantasy to feel so realistic that I would do a lot of research in history to make it more realistic and more real and stuff. And so the connection between history and fantasy is very, almost intimate to me, because that's almost the catalyst of why I started to learn so much more about it, is from my love of, fantasy essentially, or medieval fantasy at least, because when I see medieval fantasy, and it's always been the kind of intention for many of the videos of my channel, is to do the period that you are drawing from justice. It's not to say you can't change things or take liberties. Of course you can. It is fantasy. But if you're going to be using armor that's supposed to be from a medieval period, okay, do it right then. All right. So I mean, I'm not saying you can't change it to add fantasy flares, but if you change it to the point where it's impractical and you couldn't wear it, you've done something wrong. Or if you change to the point where you actually were trying to make it look like medieval armor, yet it's all wrong, where the join at the waist is wrong, the breastplate is too far down, the pauldrons are wrong, and it's just a mess. Well, you've stuffed something up as well there on top of that. And so there is a measure, I feel, of, it's called a duty of care. It's almost like a responsibility that I think a lot of writers and creators who depict medieval anything ignore and don't take. And look, it isn't like a strict, you should do this, but I think it's something that is worth being mindful of. And it's that even in fantasy, right, you actually will be educating your audience to a certain measure about medieval times. And I'm actually serious about that. There are so many people who just think studded leather was a thing because of Dungeons and Dragons. Like, studded leather exists in history because Dungeons and Dragons is based on the medieval period. It's a medieval fantasy, but it's based in this medieval theme and idea. And so when people look at the armor, weapons, and clothing that is depicted in D&D, so many people naturally translate that to how the medieval period actually looked like, and they get completely wrong. And once again, I'm not saying you can't do fantasy armors and make things different and everything, but I'm saying when you are actually lifting something more directly from the medieval period, like full plate armor or something like that, or a long sword. Fantasy swords are a more complex thing, and stuff. If you can depict something accurate, or at least if you were trying to, doing it accurately does a service to helping represent history, and oftentimes the history of many people, like our own heritage, accurately. Like for instance, like the whole, the peasants are all uneducated, dirty, people who can't read and write and everything. That's a trope that is repeated so often, not only in fantasy, but also adaptations, movies that are based in medieval periods. So when I say that I feel there's a duty of care that exists in medieval fantasy, it's small, it's less in the fantasy element, but in actual historical adaptations of the historical period. So films depicting, Braveheart, so William Wallace and stuff. There is a far greater duty of care to try and depict things accurately. I know liberties that need to be taken, but these films oftentimes are the only exposure a lot of people have with that time period, and you could be informing them grossly, because like it goes into some deeper philosophical kind of elements as to the importance of history, and it's really, my mind has been opened up far more so in my later years as to the importance of this than before, because we humans have made some really atrocious mistakes, and so you would damn well hope we would learn from them. And part of that is learning from our past, learning from history, and it helps contextualize so much. My life is happier and more fulfilling due to my understanding and learning of the past. And in one small but very prominent and profound example is quality of life. I look at the past and how difficult it was to do just small tasks like having light in your home during the night. Okay, like you had to make candles, and there was imperfect light that was dim and it would flicker, and you'd have to relight it, and it wouldn't be in every part of your room, and so it was very imperfect, difficult, troublesome, and just annoying. And yet we can get light in our homes that is brighter, more consistent and even, and it can light up our whole homes by flicking our finger, turning a switch on the wall. And when you look at the contrast between those two things, I just like the luxury we have of the modern day just hits me like a ton of bricks. And that is one example. And I can go through the list between having consistent heat in your oven to cook your food, all right? Having, water on demand in your home by turning a faucet, right? Hot water on demand, a flushable toilet, okay? These are luxuries that the people of the past, and my point of reference is the medieval period, would look upon the future, our time, and think we are living in a paradise. To think even the poor, most people, and when I say poor, I'm referring to the poor of first world countries. Most people of the poor of first world countries, not all, I know that there are homeless, which is also a tragedy, but even a large portion of the poor people of the modern day are living with luxuries that the rich and wealthy people of the past would just be amazed at. They are absolutely astounded. And so by understanding even this contrast, and you can take this and extrapolate to so many other things, like the prevalence of war or pestilence or famine, like in the past compared to now, right? It has given me a profound appreciation for the luxuries of the modern day. And there was a time in my life where I was living in far more humble circumstances, and on the metrics of the income you had and the poverty line, I was living under the poverty line, okay? And so I was poor, wasn't as poor as a lot of people, but I was poor looking back at the past. And even in that time, okay, wow, I was just overwhelmed with a sense of gratitude for the blessings in my life. Like, yeah, I lived in a small, dingy home, yet look at the hovels of the past where they had a dirt floor and their homes were literally one room. In comparison, my home that was falling apart is a mansion. And it just gave me an overwhelming sense of gratitude, and it made me happy, even in a situation where I was in a far more situation where I was poor. And so these are this is a small example of the profound benefits that come from studying the past. And when you extrapolate this to even more important things, like certain practices that we should try and either maintain or protect in society, like the value of the family and other things like that, the bedrock of society to maintain stability in even times that are becoming fairly troubled in the modern day. If we can just learn from the past, we can realize how valuable and important certain things are in the present, and we would not only be happier, we would be able to maintain peace and order and stability and be able to progress far better and more important. And so it's amazing how significant history really is, and how my eyes have been open to that as I've been immersing myself in it even more.
Did you ever think that when you started your YouTube channel, it would grow to the size and give you the opportunities it has given you?
Honestly, no. As I mentioned with one of the previous questions, when I started my YouTube channel, I honestly thought my writing career would take off well before my YouTube. Like, I didn't think I would become a massive YouTuber, and I have to pause even when I said that, because when I said because yes, I'm a massive YouTuber now, and it sounds so weird to say, because I even like subconsciously, I don't think like I haven't acknowledged that I am. I don't think I am, and it feels weird to say. But 1 million subscribers is huge. And I remember when I like started out and I had like 10,000 subscribers, I'd look at these channels that had 1 million and think that's unthinkable. And I thought I would never get. That's like, I don't know how they got there. And so I'm still processing. I still hasn't kind of hit me like. And even now, it's like it hits me in small measures. Like, whoa, that's crazy. What's happened? How did this happen? It shouldn't have happened. It's not right. I didn't expect it. And so the fact that it has is absolutely amazing. Yeah, I count my blessings.
Was it easy for you to get to this point?
That's a difficult question, because it depends on your point of reference of what you consider easy. There are things that I do that are easy for me that a lot of people would look at and would think is tremendously difficult. And it goes in reverse. There are things that I look at people do that I think how that would be a nightmare. I would hate to do that. And not only can they do it easily, they enjoy it. And again, it all comes down to a point of reference. At no other occupation in my life have I worked longer hours than doing YouTube. And this is a thing. It feels like I have done less work in my YouTube channel than these other jobs, where if I look at the hours worked, no, I've thrown way more time, effort into this than in any other occupation I've had, apart from writing. But I'm looking at, what my actual employment history. And it comes down to doing what you love. The classic saying is very true. If you do what you love, you don't have to work a day in your life. And that's not, I mean, look, it's not true, because there are moments of deep, long grudgery that it is difficult, but you just get through it because you're invested in. And it certainly comes down to when I've looked at the past where I was editing massive videos, where I had edited for like, I think 26 hours straight with not even like, not when I say break into eating, I would get food, bring it to the table and eat it while I work. And so not even breaking into eating, but of course going to the toilet and stuff. Just because, like, if you're a creative type, you become really invested in the thing that you're creating, to the point where your mind suddenly becomes focused on the finished product. You can envision it in your head, and you just have to see it brought into reality, because you want to see this vision in your mind in real life. and then you get stuck on it, and the process, the journey, the hours, and even the work, sometimes the drudgery suddenly becomes masked by this desire of seeing its completion, and the time suddenly fades by, where you look at the clock and it's like, holy crap, I've just been editing for 6 hours, but I'm not done. Let's get back into it. And suddenly you fall back into this zone where you just, you want to get it done. You have to get it done. You need it completed. And that's been my experience with so many things, because each video I do is an expression of my creative side. I always had a very, very strong creative side to my personality, where I've expressed it in my own artwork. I actually thought I wanted to be a comic book artist early in my early days, because I enjoyed drawing, and I didn't even realize that I actually hated drawing. What I loved was creating things. I loved creating characters and bringing them into a greater sense of reality. And it was only when I got pretty good at drawing, actually. You can go to my DeviantArt page and have a look at some of my artwork. And I spent years, literally years, developing that ability, fully under the impression, convinced that this was my career path. I was going to be a comic book artist because I loved it so much. And then when I got good enough, people wanted to commission me to actually create artworks for them. And I started doing it, and I started trying to draw these, artworks for other people. I hated it. I was like, hang on, what's wrong with me? What's going on? I love drawing. Why am I hating this so much? And even to that point, like, it was a mystery when that was happening. I was confused. I didn't know why I was hating it so much, because I love drawing. And the reality was, and I only learned it it took me several times before I even had realized and I could acknowledge it. It's like, I actually don't enjoy it. I don't enjoy the actual act of drawing. What I enjoyed was creating things, creating characters, and bringing them into greater realization. And that honestly was a life-changing key in realization, because there was something else that I didn't enjoy. Throughout my entire early life, I thought I utterly loathed this practice, and that was writing. I hated writing, and I hated reading as a kid. I was a terrible speller, and so this compounded by the fact that my teachers didn't know how to encourage me, and I'd always get marked horribly on all my English assignments. And so English was like my worst subject, and because I would get terrible marks in it, I hated it even more. Why would I want to do this? Why would I want to do complete English assignments if I was always going to get marked down because of my bad spelling? And I almost got kept down. I almost got kept down a grade in grade 6 because my English was so poor. And it wasn't because I was an idiot, okay? It's because I was doing things I hated. And if I am like the hardest person to motivate in the world if you're trying to get me to do something I'm not enjoying or invested in. It is like pulling teeth, okay? And I tell you what, in my previous occupations when I was in employment, there were times where I look back and reflect on it as a nightmare in my life, where I was sitting at my desk and just feeling this barrier, this almost insurmountable emotional barrier, that like almost a sense of depression that was stopping me from doing the work that I needed to do. This is what I was getting paid to do, yet there was literally an emotional mental barrier that was so difficult to try and push through to just do my work. It was really, really tough. And those experiences also made me feel like I was by nature a lazy person, because I was always so difficult to motivate to get me to work. Yet the amazing thing, and I know this in a profound retrospect now, is that I'm actually not a lazy person, because when you get me onto something that I am invested in, I can work like a bloody Trojan, 26 hours straight without a break. Because when I'm invested in something, I want to see something done. Oh my goodness. And that was like almost a surprising thing for me, because like I had this impression that I was a lazy person. And even back then, if I could realize and look back to the hours I spent and sunk into the pursuit of art and drawing, like when I say hours, I was like drawing late into the night, 12 o'clock at night when I was a kid in school and things like that, just drawing, pursuing this thing that I wanted to become skillful in because it was an expression of my creative side. I would have realized that, no, I'm not lazy. I just needed to be motivated. I needed to be invested in things. And so, I hated writing because they were not giving me the thing that I was invested or motivated in. But when I discovered that it isn't actually the action that I'm doing, that I realize that the actions I'm doing doesn't matter if the end goal is something that is an expression of my creative side that I want to see finished. And realizing that, like I said, was a life-changing experience, because then I discovered something, and it's that writing could be one of the most enjoyable things I could do if I was writing something I wanted to write. If I was writing something I was invested in, I was crafting and weaving these stories of these characters and these worlds, I can get sunk into it, and I can then suddenly write for hours on end. And I tell you what, if I could go back in time and I grab myself, my 12-year-old self who almost got kept down in grade 6 because I was so bad in spelling, and told him, you know what, you're going to be an author when you grow up, I would have almost gagged as a kid, because I was so convinced that I hated writing and that I was so bad at it. I wouldn't have believed myself. I just like that. No, that's not going to, what are you talking about? That's wrong. It's not right. It would be such a it would be such an experience if I could do that, because that's how ingrained I was that I hated writing. And it's it was an interesting journey learning about myself and what motivates me, when realizing it and focusing it. Well, and so again, I enjoy these interviews, by the way, and I'm sorry that I can get so rambly, but it always gets me to reflect on many things, because the question was, how much work do I put into it, or something along those lines. Sorry if I can't remember the exact original state of the question, but my goodness, because I get invested in it, I get invested in these videos and what I'm making, and I have that end goal in sight, I can suddenly work harder on it than any job I've ever been employed in the past. So there you go.
It's kind of surprising to me how much that I can relate to my own life in what you're talking about there. But to move on to the next question.
Well, actually, before we move on, I want to jump on that, because it's actually kind of surprised me how many my experience in my when I'm saying this, I've only had experience sharing this with guys, usually my friends, and my friends, of course, usually end up being guys apart from my wife. But the people that seem to resonate with my own experience seems to be guys, and it seems to be a more common thing that guys tend to find that they have trouble dealing with. And I wonder if it is something that is more common with the male mindset. And I kind of suspect this is because I've heard, people who are far more educated in the field than me, like Jordan Peterson, talk about ways in which, another good resource actually is A Factual Feminist. She's mentioned about ways in which environments in which little boys learn better, and ways in which they need to be motivated to get invested and focused on things to open up vast worlds of education, and the deplorable reality in which some boys, young boys, are getting almost shamed to the point where they think they're either idiots or they're not good at learning things, stuff like that. When it's not that. They're not idiots. It's just that they're not being taught the right way, in the way that engages them. And that's a shame, and it's a thing that I think that needs to be a bit more prominence, that needs to be shined on, which is why I wanted to kind of just jump on that when you said that, because that does seem to be a reality for a lot of guys. And look, if it's a reality for a lot of girls too, that's wonderful. I just haven't heard about a lot of girls, and I'm sure there must be, in fact. But my own experience that it seems to be far more of a reality for boys and men growing up, that in terms of working and especially learning in academia, that sometimes they need to be presented in a way that engages them and gets them invested in it. Because if for people of this mindset, which seems to be both you and me, if we get invested in something, suddenly not only can we work like Trojans, we can actually study. Like, I did very poorly in school. Pointing this out is that nearly, not all, but nearly every single skill set I use in my career in which I've become very successful, I did not learn in school. Or I was not interested in it in school. I taught myself nearly every single thing that I use in my skill set. Even all the things I've learned about history, I've taught myself through pursuing my own interests. And part of it was pursuing it in a way that I found interesting. If people came to me and said, Shad, we're going to teach you about history. Let's start with the year 1405 with so-and-so here in this event, I would have switched off immediately. But if someone came to me and said, Shad, do you want to play with swords and learn about how they were used in the culture and why people carry them? I would have been, hell yeah. And then you could have presented a way where I would have soaked up the information like a sponge. So the way that it's presented is profoundly crucial in engaging certain people, especially it seems like a lot of people who have this kind of barrier in not only working hard, but also studying and learning stuff. Because when I could approach subjects in the way that I was interested in, I could spend hours upon hours just reading, even academic articles and studies on the metallurgical breakdown of metals, right? I have spent hours learning about that. And like, if someone came to me, when I was a teenager and said, all right, we're going to have a lesson on metallurgy and the phases of steel in different heats, I would have switched off. If they approached me and said, we're going to teach you how you make a sword and make it in such a way that is spring steel in the strongest way possible, I get invested and I will read academic papers for hours to learn about it. And it's about how it's presented. If you present it a way that can engage me, it's amazing the level of interest and focus that suddenly gets triggered. And so, yeah, I definitely wanted to kind of just emphasize that point that you brought out as well. It's about engaging about people just people, and it can be creative people with the right mindset, and it seems to be more represented with young boys and men in the right way.
Do you think your videos also teach very engagingly?
I'd hope so. I mean, it doesn't engage everyone because people clearly have their own preferences, but it certainly engages people who share similar interests as me. Because if you're interested in swords, well, guess what? That's an opening. That's a crack in the door. I can open up a much broader study, or open up the door to present and expose you to history, even metallurgy and science and stuff like that through this interest. You like swords? Well, guess what? There are so many interesting things about swords, about metallurgy, about history, about cultural practices, about, judicial duels and knighthood and all those things. And so, yeah, if people have the similar interests, it can engage them in the similar way. But for people who are not interested in swords, it's not going to work. And it doesn't work because absolutely my content is not for everyone. There are a lot of people who it doesn't do it for them. Like my mum. My mum's on, she sees a 40-minute video on an in-depth breakdown of some nerdy, thing I'm doing, whether it's on metallurgy or castles or history. Is like, she can't, 40 minutes, I can't do it. She loves me, and I don't begrudge her at all. And I get that. And so for people who have different interests, and this also goes for people who have same mindsets, who have trouble either working at things or learning about things, who do not share similar interests than me, approaching them to engage them, the way to do it would be to engage them through the things they are interested in. But I feel very privileged and honestly honored if my content actually serves as a way to engage people like me who share similar interests into a broader exposure to really amazing things in academia, even if it's science or history or anything.
Do you think your life would be different if you didn't start your YouTube channel?
Absolutely. Well, gosh, I might not be published yet. I might have been getting close, but I would have still been pursuing my writing very doggedly. I wonder where I would have, because I'm not sure if there would ever be a point where I would have said it's not working and I have to give up. And that's a tricky, confronting thing, because sometimes that is the better decision if it's not working. But at the same time, that is the very decision that would prove you not capable of achieving what you're going after because you are giving up. For me, in the early days when I had written like 4 or 5 books, and I was still a very long way off writing the thing that was ready to be published. But I'd written 4 or 5 books, and for many years already, when people say what I wanted to achieve in life is I wanted to be a writer, and they have that kind of, it's hidden, but you can sense it. You can always sense the doubt. It's like where people think, wow, you're throwing away your life. You're never going to achieve that, because it's a far-flung goal that a lot of people don't achieve. A lot of people try it and they don't achieve it, and so that doubt is warranted, and you can sense that doubt. And in my family and stuff, where they knew what I was working towards, and I could sense that doubt. And there's like, they're not sure. And they never said it. They never said it, but I could sense it. And even after the fact that now I have achieved it and I've brought up the thing, they've admitted it, that they've even doubted it. They had that doubt at those times. And so, my suspicions were very true. You can always, you can sense it when it's there. Even when they were doubting me back then, I completely ignored it, because that's what I wanted to do. And I had made this crucial decision, basically. And it was, even if I spend the rest of my life pursuing my goal of becoming a writer, so I could write 100 books, and even if none of them ever get published, at the end of the day, I will have spent and lived a more fulfilling life doing that than if I had given up on it and then just got a successful job doing something that I wasn't enjoying or invested in. But even if it was a job I didn't enjoy, having said that, if it wasn't something I truly dreamt of, like if I wasn't pursuing the big dream, that life still would not have been fulfilling as the life I would have spent pursuing my dream and failing. I still would have lived a more fulfilling life failing at pursuing my dreams and goals than having given up on them. And there was that realization that basically put me in the mindset of, well, I don't really care what anyone says. I don't care if I fail, and I don't care if they doubt. Still going to work out. That's what I'm going for, because there are great things that you can gain out of pursuing your dreams, even if you don't succeed in it. Because even if I write all these books, I've written all these books, that's a phenomenal achievement. And I can have tremendous value in not only the fact that I've written books, but the things that you've learnt along the way. Because writing can be a very personal, intimate thing when you really dig deep and try and think about the things that you want to write about, you want to express about. You can grow as an individual and as a person. And it's a wonderful thing. It's an enjoyable thing. And so it's like any hobby that you discover that you enjoy. And that can be, it could be playing video games to, playing sports to, riding a bike to anything, right? If you find something that you enjoy the act of doing, and remember, I actually don't enjoy the actual act of writing. Like, I don't enjoy the act of drawing, but I enjoy creating. And if I'm writing something in which I'm creating something I'm invested in, I can love it and be the most fulfilling thing ever. And so if I could spend my life doing that, that's still a fulfilling life. And that was kind of the key realization for me. And so where would I be if I didn't do YouTube? I'd still be writing, whether I had published or not. I might have been able to be successful because Shadow the Conqueror, it was definitely good enough to have been picked up by an agent eventually. An agent has even offered or expressed that they would rather, represent it fully than partially. So that is the confirmation that it certainly would have happened. But this is the weird thing. And it kind of goes into these other thoughts I have about just the publishing world. It's that like there are a lot of phenomenal books that never get picked up. Harry Potter, right, was turned down by hundreds of literary agents. I don't know the exact number. It might be a little less, it might be more, but like when I heard years ago that it was turned down so much, I was shocked because it struck me as like how disconnected could so many of these high and mighty literary agents be to literally overlook, turn down one of the most successful, fantasy literary properties of all time. What's going wrong there if they can do that? Like, it amazed me. And if they could turn down Harry Potter, how many phenomenal books are being turned down and never being shown the light of day right now? And that must be a lot. And that's a damn tragedy in my mind. And that, to me, identifies a tremendous flaw in the traditional publishing world. And it's not a flaw that I can't sympathize with because it's a difficult thing. Literary agents get sent so much crap. And I mean it, like for every diamond in the rough, there is 1,000, if not 1,000,000 works of trash that people think are brilliant and they're trying to promote. And I can say that because I was one of those people who had trash in my earlier works that thought it was brilliant. And I even submitted a couple to literary agents. And so it's a tough job to sometimes, because they turn down things on pitches, on they're called query letters, where you have to pitch your book in a query letter, and sometimes you can only send the first 5 pages, and if they're charitable, they can send you the first 3 chapters in these query letters to agents and stuff. And so they don't even get to see the whole book. That's the other kind of problem they have with finding where the good works are. And that was a big barrier with my own book, Shadow the Conqueror, because it started off in a very risky way for a debut novel because the main character is unlikable. And I wrote him intentionally that way. And it starts off slower. So it's a slow start. And I wrote that, again, intentionally for the pacing and the stakes to build up gradually towards the end where it has an explosive finish. And that works brilliantly. And there are many books that actually have this structure where they start slow and they end off with a bang. And I love them, right? But for a debut novel, this is a tremendous risky thing to do because especially for trying to get it published and agents who turn things down with only looking at the first 5 pages, right? They read the first 5 pages like, oh, this is slow. I'm not really into it. Sorry, turn you down. And so, and I talked with Brandon Sanderson about this actually, and he actually agreed with me completely that writing books this way is actually a risk. Like his one of his great books, of The Way of Kings. So The Way of Kings actually starts off in an unconventional way where it's actually kind of depressing. And I even pointed this out. I mentioned this to him and he agreed with me fully. And he said that's a risky way to kind of start off a book. But he had an audience that had faith in him. He was already established writer. And so the readers, and even me, I'm one of his fans, right? When I was reading Way of Kings and it started off so depressing, I knew that, don't worry, Brandon knows what he's doing. His book is going to be phenomenal, and it ended off with a bang. And honestly, The Way of Kings is one of the most emotionally satisfying payoffs out of any book I've ever read. And so, absolutely, did it work. But if he tried to publish that book as his first book, he would have run into a lot of difficulties in trying to get it published. And so, again, I wanted to point that out as one of the difficulties that I would have even faced having tried to publish Shadow the Conqueror. So even though so many people have really enjoyed it, and literary agents have said that they would have liked to have represented it fully and have it published, I still might not have been able to get it published for those difficulties. And so I still might not be published if I didn't do YouTube, but I'd still be working at it. I'd still be working on the next book if that one wasn't working out. So that's where I would be.
I'm also curious how your friends and family have reacted to your YouTube success.
Oh, with tremendous support and congratulations. And it's been wonderful to share it with them and to be part of it. And like my brother, Jazza, well, his name is Josiah. He, is of their YouTube channel Draw with Jazza. He's been a huge amount of support and encouragement along the whole way. And so I particularly need to point out him and give a particular thanks to Jazza for that. He was successful on YouTube far before me. In fact, he was well established on YouTube when I even begun, and he was there to help me out, give me pointers and stuff in those early days, which was a huge, tremendous asset and stuff. And with the writing as well, because my brother and I, we have a lot in common in terms of our creative side, and so we've always kind of encouraged each other in that way. And so he always did encourage me with my creative pursuits and my writing and things. And yeah, so yeah, absolutely. Family's been wonderful.
You've mentioned a couple times that you've tried to write books, but you weren't happy with them, so you kind of started again. And what was your struggle with a lot of these first attempts at writing these books?
Interesting question there, because at the time I wrote them, I thought they were great. They were the best thing. They were the best I was able to write at that time, and not being fully aware of my own abilities, where I was at as a writer, and not being able to look at my work objectively. Because if you write something to the best of your ability, you lack the knowledge to be able to see what you've done wrong, and so you can't blame people too much for their inability to be able to recognize what they did wrong. But the thing is as I was writing, I was also learning. Remember those literary lectures I mentioned that I was always participating in? I was listening to them while I was writing the book. And so what would happen sometimes is that I'd be, a good way through the book, and then I just learned about this really crucial literary device, element, or convention that I needed to do that I was doing wrong, like how to write a proper third-person limited perspective, and I was accidentally falling into third-person and omniscient all throughout. I was like, well, got to start from the beginning now, don't I? So that was sending me back and things. And so that was part of the process of realizing, even in the moment, that what I had written wasn't up to scratch. And then as my writing ability increased through practice and study, and I looked back on past things that I'd already given up on because I'd learned things, and I knew I was doing something wrong when I had to restart or give up on something. And then when I got better and looked back on those things, I had a clearer picture of how bad they really were. And the more I progress as a writer, that understanding of how atrocious my early works were has just solidified even more so. And so it wasn't necessarily a matter of me hating what I'd written in the time. And there were times where I completed a book and thought it was good, because I lacked the capacity to be able to judge it competently. And it was only the point when where I started to reach a point where, as I was writing and studying, where the things that I was studying, instead of the lectures I was listening to and those things studying about writing and everything, when instead of pointing out things in which I was doing wrong in my writing, and it wasn't a matter of them reviewing my writing and saying that you're doing this wrong. It was a matter of saying, these are the things you need to do in your writing, and me realizing, oh, I didn't do that. When it came to the point where, instead of me listening to these things and seeing the things I was doing wrong, where it started to change, where I was listening to these things and they were confirming the things that I had done in the thing I was currently writing, that's when I started to realize, I'm getting it. I'm getting there. Okay, baby, we're doing it, right? That's where it started to transition. But even in the early point where that started to happen, my writing still wasn't there yet. And by the way, you're always learning, you're always improving. And that's what I'm doing now. I'm always improving, even right now. And so where I'm at now, I feel I could write Shadow of the Conqueror better than what I did then. So the point is first off, is getting good enough. Is something good enough up to the standard where it's professional, it can be published. But even once you reach a professional standard, you can definitely still improve. And you can look at like some of the most brilliant writers, some of the writers I love and adore. When I'm reading through, and I can now, I'm at the point where I see, it's like, oh, that's actually not the best wording there, or it's a legitimate error in perspective or pacing or something like that, or consistency of character or something like. And so even the best writers in the world still make mistakes. and so you're always learning and improving and things. But the point of is, like, I'm not sure if there's such thing as a flawless writer. I think as the goal, you should always aim to be the best you can be, which hopefully would be flawless. But the first point is to get good enough, to get to a point where you're writing at least passable and at a professional standard. And once you're there, then you're going good. And I have to tell you, this is an enjoyable experience because Brandon, so Brandon Sanderson, wonderful writer, he has hired me as a consultant for the Stormlight Archives 4, and there's been a wonderful experience working with Brandon and getting some of the early drafts of the book. And I was also it was a good confirming experience because I got to see Brandon's writing basically pre-edited or only slightly edited in a more raw state, and it's like, of course it lacks the polish of the final product because that's what editing is for. And so it shouldn't have come as a surprise, but it was also just it was good to see as well, to see a man who I respect so much was like, he's mortal just like the rest of us. And he would say the same thing too, because everyone's writing when you're just spewing your thoughts onto the page in its raw state is raw and it's rough and it takes polishing. And actually part of the process of learning how to be a competent writer is learning how to edit and polish your work. So what you first write, you should never take as the final thing. You need to look back, fix it up, work it, and polish it. And so learning how to polish and improve and hone and take off those rough edges is a crucial part in learning how to write at a professional standard. Because I'm not sure. Maybe there is a writer who can write the first thing that they put on page and it's perfect. But Brandon isn't like that. I'm not like that. And so Brandon being one of the best writers in the world is a good confirmation that you don't need to be like that. But you do need to learn how to polish what's there and fix it up. And of course, Brandon can absolutely do that because the final result is beautiful. And like I said, it's not to say everything's perfect. You're always able to, once you learn the craft, you can point out, it's like, well, there you go. And it's an interesting thing. So there you go.
And what made Shadow of the Conqueror different so that you felt comfortable enough releasing it publicly?
So it was I had reached a point like a good few years before where, as I was studying, as I was learning, the things that they were pointing out were confirming what I was doing. So that was a good indicator right there. It's like, okay, seems like I am doing a lot of what they're saying you should do. So there's the first thing. I had finished the book that I was currently working on, and I was happy with that. And I was ready to start something new. And the next thing about Shadow of the Conqueror was that it was very different. It was like the first initial concepts I had developed almost separately, and then seeing how they fit together, and as it developed, and then as the larger story started to dawn on me of what I could really try and convey some of these, like Shadow of the Conqueror deals with some very heavy concepts and subject matters and stuff. Sometimes I almost stumbled in inadvertently, just following the natural flow of the story and the natural implications of the history, backstory, and what the characters' choices, and others were intentional. And I could see that for me, this was something different, something that I hadn't tried to tackle before, and I got very excited for it. And it was interesting because everything that I had written before then was actually all very much solid medieval fantasy. And I wanted, and with the book I had finished before Shadow of the Conqueror, it was kind of the point where I polished that story as much as it could at the time. And I was ready to, like I said, try something different. But the thing I want to try different is like, okay, I've been doing something that's pretty traditional in the sense of medieval fantasy, but my approach to medieval fantasy is actually rather different to what a lot of people have done, because I take the medieval side very seriously, as you might guess. But it was traditional in the sense that when people think what is default fantasy, it is very much medieval fantasy, D&D and all that stuff. So I wanted to do something completely different. It's like, all right, I've been working the traditional kind of space for a while with everything I'm rewriting. Now I'm gonna do high concept fantasy. That's not only is it not medieval, but it's not even going to be on a planet. It's going to be in a different dimensional, space, with different, well, with similar laws of physics, but other things that are very different. And just go, and so world building high tier, the story high concept, the character original and different, tackling with a different backstory and everything like that. I mean, because my main character, this is something other people have complimented on. So I'm not tooting my own horn. I'm actually repeating the compliments other people have mentioned on it about the main character being very original and different in such a way that you don't often see in fantasy. And again, that was something I wanted to do intentional. And so, yeah, my approach with Shadow the Conqueror was, let's not limit myself or to the tropes that sometimes fantasy does almost limit themselves to in an unaware way, because you don't need to limit yourself to medieval settings and dwarves and dragons, which I love, don't get me wrong, but you don't need to limit yourself to that. And so because I already have that thing covered in its own story and world, yeah, Shadow the Conqueror is like, let's go all the way, baby. Let's just see how far I can push it in certain ways. And it was a fun and a joy to write. And as I was writing, as the story was coming together, for me, it struck a chord. It felt like it was something special. Like Shadow the Conqueror is something special to me. It deals with some really deep concepts that resonate to me as an individual, but also even as a reader. If I read Shadow the Conqueror, this is the type of book that would just, I would love. I very much write stories to my own tastes, and I'm very blessed that many people share those similar tastes as well and like them as well. And so at the end of it, I've had a lot of confidence in the book just because I liked it so much. And if I liked it so much, there has to be other people that would like it who, if they shared same interests as well.
Were you happy with the criticisms of Shadow of the Conqueror?
I think a lot of the criticisms are absolutely fair. Some are not, okay? Some were like, if I was to listen to from an objective point of view, they point out say an error in the character's progression, and it's like, literally, if you look at the literal plot point progression of the story, that's actually not. So there are some few criticisms that objectively, of course, I would disagree with, but then there are others that I think are completely fair, absolutely. And it's like, there's a decent there's a large portion of criticisms that I get what's the right word? I think you would call it an evil enjoyment out of, a cynical kind of guilty pleasure where it might not be the best thing that I enjoy these, but this is the thing, right? My intention with the main character was to push him as far as I could, almost right on the line, because he's a redeemed villain. And so I'm a type of writer, and also if I'm going to do something, I rarely ever am satisfied with approaching something by half measures. If I'm going to do it, I'm going to go all the way. All right. I'm going to commit to it. And so if I'm going to write a redeemed villain, all right, I'm committing to this, and I'm going to, if he was a villain, he was going to be a proper villain. And of course, I approached it in a very as mature a way as I could, as realistically as I could, because I wanted to start with essentially what is a good person and see what mistakes and moral concessions he would have to make little bit by little bit to send him down a path where he would end up being the most vile and loathsome individual this world has ever seen, and committing some of the most atrocious crimes and atrocities of this world. And so that was my process, and it was a tremendously fun and engaging kind of character study in going through, okay, what are the choices a good person would need to do to end up at that end point. And I'm very pleased to be able to find that many people feel I have done that successfully. And the criticisms that I enjoy are the people that feel I did it so successfully that they hate him and they hate the book as a result, because that was the point of me trying to push it to the line. I wanted to push it as far as I could go, to the point where like I felt 80 to 90% of the people will be able to see the context and still sympathize and empathize with this character. But I knew even before it was published that there's going to be, 10%, 5%, however much, that are going to hate this book and hate this character. And the fact that I actually did that intentionally, that was the goal that I wanted to achieve with it, that I actually wanted about, 5 to 10% of people who read this book to hate it at that level, and to see that actually be true in the reviews gives me this evil grin. It's like, yes, your hatred just fuels me. That's what I wanted. And I shouldn't get such a guilty, evil pleasure out of it, because I understand why they hate him. Because there are some things that I had the character do that is irredeemable for a lot of people. And I get that. I get it completely. And so I don't fault them at all. And so they, in terms of, if you look at the criticisms of the book, most of the criticisms fall into that realm, and I get the guilty pleasure. Then there's a more smaller measure of criticisms that I feel are wrong, unfair. And there are another portion of criticisms that very much fall into a realm of personal preference. For instance, the book is a hard fantasy, which is an interesting adaptation from the concept of what a hard science fiction is. A hard science fiction is when it's a science fiction story written with basically the science and the physics are done to be as accurate as possible. And the gag or the joke about hard science fiction is that you need PhDs to write it, and sometimes you need PhDs to enjoy it properly, because the science gets so technical and stuff like that. But I actually wrote Shadow the Conqueror is a hard fantasy where I wanted the laws of physics to interplay very directly with the magic. And so as a result, there are more technical descriptions in the book that some people have criticized, saying that there's too much of an emphasis on telling instead of showing. And I'm actually perfectly aware of this. I am aware of the concepts of showing, of telling versus showing, and showing versus telling. And yet I still wrote the book the way it did. And even after it was finished, I've gone back to the parts and areas that people pointed out, saying they thought this was atrocious. And they even go as far to say, like, this was poor writing. And I go back and I was like, no, that's actually exactly how I wanted to write it, because that's how I enjoy it. Like, I actually enjoy technical descriptions of the world in certain elements where you get to find out about the nature of the sun. Like, there's a part in the book where the narration just quickly gives a description of how the sun works. And it's a bit more of a technical, wordy description. And even before publishing it, I looked at that description and wondered if I should cut it, because I knew there are some people who felt that it's a bit too wordy, a bit too telly. And yet every time I read it, I found it really interesting. I was like, and after I was like, I like it. I like what I get to learn about the sun in that segment. And so I've kept it in, and in so many other parts. Those things. Now, this isn't to say the book is flawless. It is not, okay? There are some legitimate things where I've looked back, it's like, that could be done better. The pacing or the structure of the paragraphs could be done better. And actually, I have a second edition I have completed of the book, which just polishes some of those rough edges that even in retrospect that I've looked back is like, that can be fixed up a little bit better. But what's interesting about them is even those things that I have seen, and by the way, there are some typos even in the final release, which you will find in many first editions. There are like typos in Wheel of Time that I've noticed as well. So don't think they're not in existence, okay? But yes, of course, there are some typos here and there, which have also been fixed in the second edition. What I find interesting about this is that the people for which the story resonates and they enjoy the character and stuff like that. The second edition is no more enjoyable, even with the additional polishing, than what the first edition is. And so I haven't even gotten around to publishing the second edition yet. And I have it. I have the document right on my computer to put out the second edition. And part of it is, I guess, also laziness. There is a lot of fiddly, grindy stuff that I need to do. I need to reformat it and redo it. And so I'm like, oh, you got to reformat it, and then I need to publish it, and then deal with the ISB and the book, and I don't know how that's going to things. And so those things have also been a barrier in getting the second edition out. But the other thing is that the people who've been loving the book, like it hasn't been mad. Like even those things that even I've been able to see that okay, and there's not heaps, but there are certain points that's like okay, let's fix that. Like I said, that does not affect the enjoyment of the book at all, which is an interesting realization because there is absolutely a line in terms of writing quality which can break the book and make it unenjoyable, and I know my book is well past that line. Okay, and so any errors that exist in the writing are comparable errors that you can find in many published books. Because is there such thing as a perfect writer? I would never claim to be, and I'm not sure any writer ever would dare claim to be unless they are arrogant beyond belief and have a pole so far up their own rear end. No, sorry, not a pole, their own heads up their own rear end to be able to believe that, because no, there's not. And so it's funny, actually. I know of writers as well that after they publish, they never even read their book again because they know once they go back, they're going to find things that they want to change and fix up in it. That is one of the great, I guess, challenges and things that exist for us, because you're always improving. And when you're improving, you can always look back on your past works and find things like, oh, I could write that better. And so some writers just don't even do it. They don't look back because they don't want to get the cringe as like, oh no, what did I do? Right. So these are, I guess, all my broader, more detailed thoughts. And actually, I appreciate they asked that because I've never even spoken about it publicly. It's an interesting thing about hearing criticism and review and all those things and stuff. And so I'll just also finish off on that point about say that the parts where things are more descriptive and more wordy and stuff like that. And those ones, right, when they say that they feel that there are parts where it's too much told and too much shown, they honestly come down to a difference in your own personal tastes. Because what I find really interesting is when I get reviews from people where literally two different people have pointed out the same thing in the book. One person saying they disliked it and another person saying they loved it. And that's an interesting thing because like if you were the type of person where you wanted to try and take on all the feedback and try and all right, your feedback is valid, I'm going to fix everything that you say. What do you do then when you get that, where someone says they love something and someone says they hated something? You're going to be in a rock and a hard place. And so at the end of the day, then you have to go with what you think is right. And so what the interesting thing is, one of the things that a portion of readers have really loved is the greater detail. Actually, in actual fact, that's one of the stronger compliments to my book, is that people say one of the greatest standout things about my book is the world building. And part of the world building is the fact that I've gone into the detail describing it, like how the sun functions in the universe and stuff. And there have been so many readers who share the same preference I have to having a more described, detailed, immersive world, and they love it. And there are some people who think that, oh, that's way too much wordy. It's funny, there's a YouTube review where she compared my book to reading a science textbook at times, and she's like, I couldn't even finish it. And I was like, I understand. That's valid. The book was not written for a person with your tastes. So if you don't like it, that's perfectly fine. And for people who have my types of tastes, who love the technical side of world building and fantasy, oh, we love that stuff. We can just eat it up. I'd also like to point out that I'd also like to echo something that Orson Scott Card has said. And Orson Scott Card is the author of Ender's Game, by the way. And it's that there can be a misunderstanding of the notion of showing versus telling, where people always think that showing is more preferable in narration than telling. And that's actually incorrect. There are many times in which telling is far better, the more preferable option, because it can achieve something in which showing can't. Telling something through narration is more expedient. You can describe something quicker than if you were to show them through the actions or what the characters are doing. And so if you are mindful of pacing and you have something where you want this event to come to the story at this point and stuff, but you need this information to be conveyed before then, and you don't want it to drag on too much, that is a perfectly valid point in the story to tell it. You need to be able to figure out how to integrate it in an effective way. And so for me, I'm actually very mindful about the points of the parts where the narration tells something to the audience. One, usually I always try and make it from the voice of the character, not from the narration. So it might be the character's internal monologue that says it, or he says something or something like that, okay? Or he's noticed it. The character's noticed it, and the narration rounds off what their thought process was. And so that makes it flow much better because it's tied in with the scene. So when it comes to narration, there are so many very specific literary tools that you do need to learn as a writer to be able to do it in a way that it is easy, and not only easy to process, but enjoyable. Especially if it's the type of reader who enjoys the details and stuff like that. The way those details conveyed are very important. And so, again, the matter of showing versus telling absolutely can be done. In actual fact, most of the story is told through narration, okay? So the idea that you shouldn't tell, it can be absolutely incorrect if you're looking at it in the wrong way, because that's what the nature of narration is. And then convey in the right way, in the way that is easier to translate to the audience, the reader, is you can do it in a much better efficient way. And the other way is to do it in small chunks, okay? Avoid large, info dumps, because info dumps are something you need to be very mindful of, but you can translate a lot of information in a very subtle way if you know how to do it. Put it in the voice of the character, do it in small little chunks, a chunk here, or the story progresses a bit more, and then something happens where you do the second chunk, and then you can let it flow on like that. And so, sorry, I'm getting a bit more technical on the writing side of things, but it's just an interesting thing where I do see sometimes people overemphasize showing versus telling, where sometimes telling, when done right, can be more expedient and is more appropriate for the specific scene or point that you're doing. And again, it's not to say showing isn't crucial either, because absolutely there are many times where you must show things from the perspective of the character. Absolutely. It's a balance. It's what you want to achieve for the story you're writing. That should be the thing the goal that you're focusing on. And if you can do it in such a way in which the reader can enjoy it, especially the target audience, and if they are reading and enjoying it, you've succeeded and you've done it. Well done.
So when you talk about world building, it reminded me of a quote from the author of Star Wars Aftermath novels, Chuck Wendig, who said, "World buildings are not storytelling," when referring to Lord of the Rings and his criticism of Lord of the Rings and why he doesn't view it as being very good. I was curious of what your reaction to that would be.
I disagree. I can kind of see where he's coming from. See, and I've actually said this in one of my own videos. I have a video on world building, okay, and I'm going to repeat just briefly some of the things I say in there. And it's that world building, okay, even if you have the best world building in the world, if the story isn't up to scratch, your story's going to suck. Okay, so you need a good story, you need a good characters, okay, but to downplay world building in the sense that it can't enhance, and in fact that it can't be the most enjoyable part of a story, is incorrect. And I think that is almost an implication of what he's saying. Because what was the quote again, if you could repeat it?
When referring to the reason why he doesn't think Lord of the Rings is very good and why it's overrated, he said world building is not storytelling.
Yeah, see, this is particularly why I disagree with him, because good world building can influence in such a profound way the story. Good world building can be one of the greatest sources for conflict, okay? I mean, for instance, all right, if you have something that's happening in the world in which it's about to fall apart or something like that, that becomes the central conflict that the characters need to solve. Okay, that is a conflict that comes from the world building. If you can justify it in a really inventive way, like for instance, say there are these magical rings that were forged that give leaders of the world tremendous power, in which they are able to build incredibly large civilizations and stuff like that, that are linked to this one central ring, that whoever has a central ring can control all these other people, right? You know where I'm going with this, okay? And then that one ring is then corrupted and all these things. That is a catalyst for an entire story that is coming directly from the world building itself. Okay. And that is an example of the world building creating story, almost being the story, in a sense. And so good worlding will not only enhance, but add to the story and be the source, can be a direct source for the plot of a story. Okay. Be a source for the conflict. It can be a source for the resolution. It can be a source for progressing and pacing and all so many things. So yeah, I disagree. I think world building can absolutely be a crucial element to a story. And that's why I love it. I get sucked into it, and I want to do it. I mean, I looked at my own novel, Shadow the Conqueror. There are key parts, and even I won't, no spoilers, but one of the large climactic, conflicts is resolved through exactly from the world building. Okay, it's through the understanding of the mechanics of how something works in the world that the character is able to use to help overcome one of the most difficult things in the final climax of the story directly from the world building. So yes, I disagree emphatically.
A little while ago, you announced that you were consulting on a short film adaptation of your book, which is on Kickstarter. Is there anything more you can tell us since you announced the project?
Yes, absolutely. And I can announce it has been delayed. It might be anticlimactic, but I think everyone understands because of the COVID situation around the world. So unfortunately, filming cannot move ahead when we were hoping. We were hoping to do it in September, honestly, and that's needed to be delayed until for early next year. The exact date isn't solidified yet, but it's not to worry, it's still there, and I have every faith in Duratia Productions to be able to move forward. They are just as invested in it as before. And very excited for it as well. So we're kind of in the marathon stage where up to the Kickstarter, it was the sprint, getting everything ready. And now it's a marathon where it's just, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And so it's just taking one small step, preparing things, getting everything ready. And so that's what they're working on. And, when they want me to consult or get my feedback on something, they always send me an email, and then everything else is kind of in their hands, and I have full confidence in them as well. So that's kind of where we're at.
I don't know if you've announced it yet, but before on Morning Nonsense, you did mention that you were working on a graphic novel adaptation of your book. Can you just talk a little bit more about that?
No. I'm not gonna. I haven't done a big announcement yet, and so when I do the big announcement, I'm gonna be interviewing the artist on it as well, giving more details and things like that. And that builds up excitement and hype and stuff. So I apologize, but I'm not going to be sharing too much more about that wonderful project, because when I do, I want to build excitement for it basically and stuff, and get people kind of invested and enthused and stuff. And there'll be more information to come in the future. But that kind of announcement that something is in the works will have to stay as the first taste for those people interested.
Last time you were on the Smudcast a while ago, you mentioned that you were thinking about writing a book inspired by Star Wars. Has that gone anywhere?
Oh, good question. So it progressed, but it can't progress too much more at the moment because I only have so much of my, I guess, time in the day that I can devote to certain things. And so I actually have developed some really, really cool foundational kind of elements that I really want to develop further. And so there's kind of like two extremes in terms of the depiction of the world, but I got so much of the world building all nailed down. It works really cool, and I'm excited for it. Like I actually made 3D models of the spaceships and stuff. You've actually seen one of my early 3D models of spaceships. I've made some new ones, and they're way better. Maybe I'll get you to do some nice renders of those ones for me. So I got some of the, like, I've got the, the spaceships that the heroes, the main iconic spaceship that the hero will use and get from point A to point B. Much of the concepts, the world building and things, and so all the foundation is there. And I even wrote the first 2 chapters of a concept, just starting out, seeing, okay, there's this way I could execute it. And I wrote the first 2 chapters, and I was really happy with them. I'm not sure I'm going to go that way because I have 2 extremes to pursue this universe in, and a lot of the nuts and bolts don't need a change in terms of how the universe will work together, like the technology, characters and everything. But there are 2 extremes in the visual finished look, and I can't really decide which way, because that will decide a lot about other elements in the story that will then need to be developed further. And one is like they're kind of they're very, very contrasting visual styles for the universe, and one is very much like Star Wars, and I'm not sure if that's the right way to go. Maybe you can give me some feedback on it, because at the same time, we want something like Star Wars to fill the empty hole in our souls that is there from Star Wars's fall, from what's been done to it. And like the Orville has done for Star Trek fans, the Orville is great, and it's so visually similar to Star Trek. And so one approach is like that, is to make it visually similar to the universe of Star Wars, but with its own story that hits the same thematic beats, but with great different characters, its own great story, its own world building with similarly different things. Because that was my intention. I wanted to make something that could, be to Star Wars what the Orville has been to Star Trek. But at the same time, it is so much like Star Wars, and I wonder, because there is this other extreme that I could put it in, which would actually make it feel very distinct, even though it would have the same thematic beats that we love out of Star Wars, the whole good versus evil, the great conflicts and epic kind of scale, sweeping space opera kind of thing. So that would all be the same. And so it could still fill the function that I kind of want with this series of being a new Star Wars. But the visual style would be a kind of low-tech, high-tech mesh merge kind of thing, like a kind of fantasy high-tech mix, where it'd be like Conan the Barbarian with a advanced kind of futuristic exoskeleton with a laser sword and a futuristic blaster gun kind of thing, and the world would be in a more kind of savage, lawless state, where it'd be this really fun visual depiction of both the combination of both low tech and high tech, where the world would be like almost 70% fantasy barbarian low tech kind of thing, and 30% kind of sprinklings of cool Star Wars styled technology, but more ancient, like this old forgotten technology that these barbarian worlds are repurposing and using and engaging in warfare and space travel and stuff. So those are the extremes, and I can't decide between them. I guess I'll have to just mull it over. I know I'll come to a decision eventually of what I think will work best for that, but at the moment it's not progressing anymore, and I'm either going to I would like to write a novel on it, or produce a graphic novel, even like a proper full-size graphic novel series with that, and see where it goes from there. But I'm not pursuing that at the moment because I have fallen into a serious project that I'm now like fully investing, committed on getting finished, and it's my next book. And so it's interesting actually, because I've been working on the sequel to Shadow the Conqueror, of course, and that's been progressing a bit slowly, but all the groundwork has been getting put into place. But I've realized And interestingly enough, if people think that this is going to delay Shadow the Conqueror, I'll probably actually, by me finishing off this book I'm currently working on, will get me, it has got me into such a feverish writing. I'm doing it every day. I'm working on it every day, that this has put me back into the writing mindset so firmly that once I then move on to the sequel for Shadow the Conqueror, I'll be hopefully be able to focus on that as strongly as I'm currently focusing on the thing I'm working on now, which would actually make the sequel to Shadow Conqueror finish earlier. But what I'm currently doing is rewriting the book I wrote before Shadow of the Conqueror. I had gone back and looked at it and found there is some good stuff in there, like really good stuff. And I'm a much better writer than what I was there. But what's interesting, right? The level, the quality of the writer I was when I started Shadow the Conqueror was the level I was when I finished that book. And so the book wasn't terrible, but I've learned so much more about the medieval period, and I am a better writer now that I'm doing good things with that book, really good things. And so I'm taking all the good things that were there and I'm just making them shine, like really bringing them out. And it has been so much fun seeing this book reach the potential that it should have been at back then, but what I can do with now. And I'm excited. I'm excited for it. And so I'm gonna actually, like, my goal, I hope, usually I'll fail, but even if I fail, it's still going to be done pretty soon, is to get through and finish this book in the next 2 to 3 months. And so with that, that's exciting. And so there's actually going to be a whole new book, not separate to the Shadow of the Chronicles of Everfall, that I'm hoping I could get out sooner than people might have expected. And I'm excited for that as well, because they'll get to read something different from me. And the other thing I'm excited about is, and I guess this is a big announcement, I haven't mentioned this anywhere else, right? This is my medieval book, right? I'm the medieval guy, okay? And so it seemed a bit odd that my debut novel was not a medieval fantasy. Well, here it is, people. It's coming sooner than you think. Shad's, medieval fantasy, Magnus Opus fantasy thing is coming soon, and that's what I'm currently working on. It's going to be done sooner than you might think, and I'm excited for it as well. I'm going to have to go to bed kind of soon, so I don't know how many questions we have, but just a couple more, basically, I think.
Okay, it seems we won't be able to get onto audience questions, but that's fine. We'll try and get through the last ones.
Oh, sorry. Is there some audience ones?
Yeah, I did collect a couple of them, but we can try and go over them another time if you have to.
Possibly. Man, I'm really enjoying this interview. You got great questions, and it's causing me to really kind of reflect.
Do you think that the quality of realism in fights is important in film and TV?
It depends. It depends on what the film is supposed to be. Now, this is an interesting concept. It's one that I'm even still reflecting on and trying to understand, because I really do feel works of fiction, especially works of entertainment, have a purpose. They're usually defined by genre, but not necessarily all the time. And who gets to define what something is meant to be? Is it the author? Or is it the audience? Because the death of the author, I do believe, is a real thing. And so sometimes what the author was thinking they were making ends up being something completely different, that actually a whole different audience than what they were thinking of targeting it to embraces and loves. But once something is made, okay, when you watch it, you can get, I do feel you can actually figure out what it's trying to be. And that can be from many things. It's tone, it's structure, how serious it is, how humorous it is, how epic or underscaled it is. All these things. I feel, in fact, most, if not all, people get a subconscious understanding of what a work is trying to be fairly early on after watching it. And that creates expectations. And those expectations are very important to be fulfilled. If it doesn't fulfill those expectations, it fails at what it was supposed to be. And it's a poor work as a result. Now, as to how important a fight scene is with a movie specifically, very much depends on what type of movie it's meant to be. Because, for instance, Jackie Chan movie, those fight scenes are pretty darn important for the enjoyment of that movie. I'm not going in the Jackie Chan movie to enjoy the really invested love story and the high concept of drama and the commentary on the socio-economic political nature of certain things. I'm not going into that. I'm going in to watch some awesome choreography, okay? And so if the movie then fails what I was expecting, I will judge it very poorly. Now, it's not to say Jackie Chan can't make a film in which it's intended to be something else, but then I would be judging it on a completely different point of reference. And the thing is, Jackie Chan, he has tried to do some like dramatic, more serious films with no fight scenes, and I don't even remember what they were. All I remember is thinking they were horrible. It's like, sorry, Jackie, mate, stick to fight scenes, right? Stick to what you're good at. But in a serious kind of film, the quality of the fight scene is far less important than the dramatic tension and many other elements. And so it's interesting how important certain ingredients are in a film based on what the film is meant to be. A love story, the most important thing to nail is the love story and not the fight scene. A Jackie Chan movie, it's far more important to nail the fight scene than the love story. And because of that, we can actually have different standards that we're judging it against, objective standards that we can judge it against very, very specifically, and reach very different results. And so Star Wars is a great example because the fight scenes have always increased the dramatic tension of it in huge amounts. And the better the fight scenes have gotten, we can see that the dramatic tension and the enjoyment of the film has been enhanced as a result. And so when we get a poor fight scene now in a Star Wars movie, that honestly affects my enjoyment of the whole film far greater than if I got a poor fight scene in a love story that had like a duel between two, love interests and stuff like that. And so, yeah, it's all a matter of the point of reference, in my opinion, and what it's meant to be, what the film is meant to be.
Okay, I've cut it down to just two more questions so I can let you go. In reference to your video about the throne room fight scene in The Last Jedi, 8080 chat said, if you criticize any fight scene that heavily, you're going to ruin your enjoyment. I'm curious in what your response to that would be.
Well, it depends on the context of criticize. People always think about criticism in a negative term, but if you look at something critically, you can find things that you didn't see before that are actually even better than what you thought. But look, in casual terms, is obviously talking about criticisms as the negative term, and that's usually the way we apply it in casual language. So I won't take it out of the context of what it was meant to be given. But this is the thing, all right? Like, if I try and criticize a good fight scene, generally I end up appreciating it more because I find less things. And look, you can really nitpick, okay? Of course you can find things, negative about it, but have a look at my fight scene autopsy reviews of, the duel between Anakin and Obi-Wan, okay, in Revenge of the Sith. There are things that I legitimately point out are bad, but generally that's framed in the context that helps me appreciate all the other things that it's doing brilliantly. And so even when I'm nitpicking, and not only nitpicking, sometimes I do point out legitimate larger flaws in it, it's enhancing my enjoyment of it. And compare that with my criticism of the throne fight scene in Last Jedi, where it's just the whole thing is garbage, okay? And so I would have to say I disagree. Because what was the exact quote that you're always going to enjoy it less if you criticize?
If you criticize any fight scene that heavily, it's going to ruin your enjoyment.
Yeah, of course I disagree completely because sometimes when you go in to criticize something, you find that it's better than what you thought it was, honestly. And it's so funny. Is that trying to imply that you should never criticize anything then because you're just going to find...
I think what he was maybe trying to imply is that you're going to find problems in any fight scene.
Yeah, of course you can find problems in normal. I'm not sure there's any such thing as a perfect fight scene. Maybe there might be. Like the Adoria one is pretty darn good. And also, Princess Bride is pretty good. I'm gonna do that one very soon, actually, a fight scene autopsy of Princess Bride, because that's just great. But no, I don't think there's such thing as a perfect fight scene. But even if you see flaws, no, that doesn't, like, sometimes, like I said, that can help you appreciate all the things that they're doing really good in it. And you just end up appreciating it more because they got so much right. So yeah, odd statement.
And the last question for now, can you give any examples of really good fight scenes and choreography in media?
Oh, well, I mentioned 2 just before. So there is a YouTube channel called Adoria Oromon. I can't pronounce the last name too well. But they have this like fight scene, which I believe should be the gold standard for, medieval inspired fight scene, because it is the perfect mix of action choreography, cinematic styled, over the top action choreography that has a lot of exchanges, which honestly, right, that type of fighting is unrealistic. Fights don't last that long, okay? But it's the perfect mix of that style with realistic sword fighting, with, not leaving yourself open, not overswinging your strikes, keeping things tight and quick and contained. And it's just, beautiful, perfect. I encourage everyone to watch it. It's just amazing. And then, okay, so what are some great standout fight scenes that I really, really liked in actual pop culture? I mean, one of the classics, of course, is Princess Bride. Love that one. Anakin vs. Obi-Wan. Some of the best choreography, fight scene style choreography in pop culture, honestly. Rurouni Kenshin, from memory, that has some great cinema. So the live action Rurouni Kenshin has some great cinematic styles. It's been too long since I've seen it to be able to actually remember the flaws, and I'm sure there must be flaws here and there. But in terms of the cinematography and the flow and pacing, it was really, really enjoyable. The Rurouni Kenshin stuff with some really impressive complex moves that, now that I think about it, and really cool complex moves in the choreography just enhances it really well. Off the top of my head, those are the main ones. And I know this is the type of question that I'm going to kick myself later for, not remembering some great, awesome ones, and not mentioning them now, which I'll think of later. So I have to apologize. I'm sure there's some great ones that aren't coming to my mind. But the ones I have mentioned are what I can think of right now.
Hopefully another time we can possibly go over the audience questions, and maybe that'll give me some more time to try and collect some more. I hope everyone found this interview insightful. Thank you for your time, Shad. I know this is getting pretty late for you. If you enjoy my content and would like to see more, make sure to check out more of my work. You can support my channel through Patreon. I also appear on the smudcast around 5 p.m. EST, 4 p.m. Central, and 10 p.m. here in the UK. And Morning Nonsense is every weekday at 8:30 Eastern or 1:30 here in the UK again. Make sure to check out Shadiversity's work. He has some really great content. I really can't recommend his work more.
Thank you very much, mate. This has been a pleasure. A really enjoyable interview. So, looking forward to when we do it again.
Hopefully we can work out a time where we can go over audience questions. If you do have any questions for Shadiversity, make sure to leave them in the comments and I'll add them to the list. Thank you for watching, and make sure to look out for my next videos.